Center for the Study of World Religions, Harvard Divinity School.
My name is Jeffrey Breaux, and I'm a program lead for the Psychedelics and Spirituality Initiative at the Center for the Study of World Religions. Today's event on psychedelics and Islam is part of the Center's Psychedelics and the Future of Religion series, which is now in its 5th year. This series is one element of our larger Psychedelics and Spirituality Initiative, which includes a variety of public programming, research, and conferences at the intersection of psychedelics and religion. This work is part of the Center's ongoing and evolving initiative called Transcendence and Transformation, or TNT for short. If you are interested in our Psychedelics and Spirituality program, the TNT initiative, or any of the other research happening at the Center, we will put a link to our homepage and the newsletter sign up in the chat. We will also put a link in the chat for the homepage and newsletter of the Harvard Study of Psychedelics in Society and Culture. The CSWR is one of 3 centers at Harvard focused on the many ways that psychedelics appear and interact in society. And that newsletter will keep you up to date on the many happenings in the psychedelic world at the university. Quickly, for those of you joining in for today's conversation, you may be interested in an upcoming event on psychedelic chaplaincy. That CSWR event will be on April 22nd over Zoom. We will be joined by Roman Politsky and Caroline Peacock, both researchers at Emory University who are working with the Center to design 2 psychedelic chaplaincy workshops. You can register for this event and for all of our upcoming events at the CSWR's website. Okay, with that housekeeping out of the way, in today's event, we will explore a range of questions, possibilities, and concerns related to psychedelics and Islam. I want to briefly thank Jay Michelson for helping to conceive of this panel, which emerged out of the wonderful conference on psychedelics and monotheism that he and Noah Feldman organized at Harvard Law School earlier in the month. Recordings from that conference should be available online soon. As with all of the Center's work on psychedelics, today's panel will present a variety of perspectives, including scholarly research and lived experience. We're joined by panelists Sugra Ahmed, Ayize Jama-Everett, Kamal Abu-Shamsieh, and Terence Savea as a respondent. To quickly give a sense of how the conversation will unfold, in a minute I will pass things over to Paul to introduce himself and our first panelist. Each panelist will have about 15 minutes to share their work and perspective individually. Following their talks, Taryn will take center stage to respond to the presentations from the perspective of a scholar of Islam who's working outside of psychedelic studies. Before each presentation, Paul or I will appear to briefly introduce the next speaker. All right, with that, I will pass things over to Paul to introduce himself and Sugra Ahmed.
Thank you, Jeffrey. Hello, everyone. I'm Paul Gillis-Smith, also a program lead for psychedelics and spirituality at the Center. Without further ado, I will introduce our first speaker today, Sugra Ahmed. Her expertise lies in religion, plant medicines, and Muslim cultures. She leads a digital Muslim psychedelic network. She's a public speaker and enjoys discovering historical connections between Islam and plant medicines. Sugra was the first female to be elected to lead a Muslim organization in the UK and was awarded the Noor Inayat Khan Award for Woman of the Year. She has an MA in Islamic Studies and a diploma in Islamic jurisprudence and is a chaplain. Sugra, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Paul, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening, assalamu alaikum to people wherever you might be. My name, as Paul rightly said, is Sugra Ahmed, and I come to you today from the United Kingdom, which is my home. I live in England, and so it's coming close to evening here, and I imagine it's very early in the morning for those who might be on the West Coast. It's my absolute honor, pleasure, and privilege to be able to speak today alongside my panelist colleagues about Islam, Muslims, and plant medicine, entheogens, psychedelics, whatever term we like to use when it comes to this kind of conversation. I will be talking a little bit about my my own relationship with Islam and Muslims before I became a participant in a clinical trial at Johns Hopkins and NYU for religious professionals, and then talking about some of the work that I'm doing as a direct result of those experiences that I had. So my relationship with Islam before I participated in the clinical trial, which was in 2018. Before that, I was a what people might refer to as a practicing Muslim. I, prayed regularly, kept all my fasts. It's actually coincidentally Ramadan right now, and several of us might be fasting today. And I had a very close, strong relationship with God. I had a close relationship with the teachings of the Quran and the Sunnah, the Hadith, the sayings and the actions of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, that are documented. And most Muslims will try and sort of be cognizant of those and be aware of those, and maybe even try to follow some of those practices. And so for me, those things were incredibly important, and my life was shaped through that sort of regularity of worship and consciousness, and making sure that when I think about practicing my faith, it's not just about practical physical worship, but it's about how I talk to somebody, it's about smiling at somebody, and all of the things that we know make common sense and make for a good community and good societies, but are also documented as some of the things that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would do on a regular basis. So I felt a very conscious practicing Muslim, and then I was approached to be involved in the study. I applied and I went through various different psychometric tests to be able to be accepted into the study. It's a clinical trial, and so the rigor with which people were accepted was quite high. Lots and lots of different kinds of tests were done. Luckily, we were doing all of this at Johns Hopkins, which obviously is in a hospital too, so that felt very comforting. But initially, when I was invited to apply, I was quite nervous, and I think for several reasons. One, I'd never heard of the word psychedelics or entheogens or plant medicines before. But secondly, I always understood that actually this probably falls into the category of drugs, and so intoxication to me was forbidden, and to a lot of Muslims actually is forbidden in Islam, and the Quran talks a little bit about what exactly that might mean, specifically in terms of alcohol, and about how substances that veil the mind are not permissible, particularly when it comes to performing acts of worship. And then I got into conversations with various people who are learned in my traditions, and we got to thinking about actually what is psilocybin, for example, the particular substance that was going to be used in this study. And we came to the conclusion that actually it unveils the mind. Mushrooms, other substances that take us into these mind-altering experiences actually help us come and meet with our actual selves, with our real selves, our true selves, all veils removed. And so rather than veiling, it's an unveiling of the mind, and the heart and the spirit. And all of the layers that we have sort of put upon ourselves or have been put upon us, whether it's trauma or whether it's social norms and values, whether it's patriarchy or any other kind of ism that we actually don't really feel very comfortable with, but we grow to tolerate in life because it's so predominant. All these layers are removed, and you come to meeting with your, well, at least I came to meeting with my true self. I had I had I had two wonderful experiences, but I also had some struggles too. So my two wonderful experiences, first of all, were centered around the importance and the magnitude and the sort of nub of it all, which is love in the world, in the universe, in all of existence. And my second experience was on the theme of the womb being the center of all existence, through which existence is created. Whilst a lot of the experiences that we have when we're taking we're taking substances like this, the experiences are often described as ineffable, and in my case, that is of course also true. I I'm very grateful that I'm able to at least understand the themes of my experiences and being able to communicate them in this way. The difficulties that I had were things that nobody could really sort of in the end help me to relieve in any way. One, because I was one of the final participants to join the clinical trial, and so all of the sort of ways in which we would measure, the across all the different participants, those rules and regulations and sort of frameworks had already been set and were rooted, and so were not for changing. So one of the things that I really struggled with, for example, was the playlist that we were listening to. Now, whilst the scientists that I was working with and the guys that would ultimately sit with me, whilst they had a lot of compassion and understanding for where I was coming from, they were unable to actually ensure that the playlist was also quite inclusive of my tradition. It was quite Euro-Christian centric. There was a lot of what seemed like cathedral type music, which was beautiful, but it wasn't of my tradition now. And I was really curious about whether, a playlist is a really fundamental part of your experience, especially if you're listening to those songs the whole way through your experience. So I was very curious about what my experiences could have been had that playlist been designed by me for me as a Muslim woman, a person of color. The other thing that I really struggled with was the fact that there was nobody in the team that really understood my tradition. And again, there was a lot of empathy for me, a lot of compassion from the team about the fact that they couldn't do anything about that. But it did sort of make me curious about the fact that I actually gave, in the end, instructions to the guides to say that if I speak in a language that is not English, could you just try and capture down how, phonetically what I'm trying to say in English script, and I can figure it out later. So, for example, in one of my experiences, and this often happens when something is ineffable for Muslims, we use language like Subhanallah, glory be to God, Alhamdulillah, praise be to God, Allahu Akbar, God is the greatest. And so when I was experiencing phenomena in my own mind, in my experience, those are the only words I could use. There were literally all other words, all other languages escaped me, and they seemed to be the most appropriate words. And I was quite fortunate that my guides actually did write something down that helped me to understand, that's where I was using those words. And it created a layer of connection that I think adds value to my experience and adds value to my integration after the experiences. And so there are these and many other complexities that I think are really important to consider when we're thinking about plant medicine and theology and psychedelics and specific religious, theological, spiritual communities. I know a lot of work is happening and has been done around my Jewish and Christian siblings and plant medicine, but unfortunately there isn't an awful lot around Islam that is well known, and that's one of the reasons why I'm really grateful for this panel today and for the conversation that we're having. And the symposium that happened at Harvard Law School a few weeks ago, where people are really trying to sort of create a space when we're talking about religions, Abrahamic religions, monotheistic religions, spirituality and psychedelics, that we're also cognizant that Islam also needs to be in this conversation. Muslims also have something to say. And so from those experiences, one other thing I want to say is that before my actual 2 doses in the clinical trial, I did ask the scientists if they wouldn't mind giving me just a couple of minutes. I'd made my ablutions, along with my intentions before the actual dosing, and I wanted some time to just do a little worship of my own on my own terms in keeping with my own tradition. And I was able to do that. And for that, I was really, really grateful, actually, because I didn't have to do that. And that meant a lot to me. It gave me a lot of comfort. And I felt like I was being held by God in a room full of people that didn't know God in the way that I knew God. And also, of course, I don't know God in the way that they know God. But that sort of deep connection right before really helped me sort of sail off in the best possible way. Now, as a result of those experiences, my life before the clinical trial itself, and my life since, I feel I've been called to do work in this area. My background has been in academia, in community activism, and in policy, all along the lines of religion, social issues, culture. And so there's a weaving together of these different kinds of things that has brought me to this place where today I'm spending more and more time building up a container called Ruhani. Ruhani means spirit in many different languages, in Farsi, in Persian, in Arabic, in Urdu, and so on and so forth. And Ruhani just seems fitting because I feel it's the spirit that is at work when we are on our journeys, and it's the spirit that we are encountering in this extremely pure and raw fashion. The mind is there too, but it's the spirit that's the most important thing for me. And the spirit goes on this incredible journey, never to be the same again after that journey. So Ruhani is essentially at the moment a digital container bringing Muslims with plant medicine experience together from around the world. We are building community, we are integrating our experiences in ways that other spaces don't allow us to, and we're working together in establishing some key baselines to educate, inform, and offer pathways to Muslims that we might know or Muslims who come across our work. At the moment, we're an informal container. We don't have any kind of digital presence as yet, but all of that is in the offing for later this year. Our work essentially focuses on three areas. One is about building relationships and being present in places like this today, so building that relationship strand of our work. The second is education, having conversations across our own communities, including our own scholarship where possible. And thirdly, building confidence, offering well-informed and confidential spaces to those who need them within our own communities. Our communities are vast, extremely diverse. They come from all over the world, as you might know, Islam being the second largest religion in the world. And so there is no one voice that can speak on behalf of all of them. However, my intention, and intention is such an important word in this conversation. My intention is that knowing what we do is important because there isn't an awful lot out there. There is some work out there, but there isn't an awful lot, so there's plenty of room for more. But how we do this work is equally important. So being able to set new baselines, new sort of standards in the way that we work is really, really important to me. Those standards for me have to be in keeping with Quran and Sunnah, so the teachings in the Quran and the teachings of Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, as well as learning how not to do things from either the current space in the wider world, or indeed in just the professional world. We all know various toxic cultures that are difficult to break, but this is an opportunity for us to sort of set something up that is in keeping with our own traditions, but also sound in terms of modern ways of leading. And so Rouhani is trying to build essentially a complex multi-partner system that is intended to build trust, to build understanding, knowledge, and importantly, community assets. Ways in which people can offer advocacy. So if you need something, then even if I can't help you with that, I know exactly where to send you. So it's important to me that this work is hyper-relational, both within our own communities, but also the wider psychedelic community, so that we can build what I call a big tent culture and combat a silo or tribal mentality, which is, many of you might know, is akin to human behavior. And there's somebody called Professor Michael West, who is at the University of Lancaster in the UK, who talks extensively about this. So we don't want to compete with each other. Rouhani is not seeking to compete, it's seeking to add something new. I think I might be out of time. I have lots more to say, but we can always come back to that in the Q&A. But I just want to end on the fact that I feel I have been called to this work, and so building from the ground up is complex, it's difficult. It takes a lot of resource, a lot of people, and I'm really, really grateful that we have a small community that is working on this.
Thank you so much, Sugra. Let me myself, here we go. I now have the pleasure of introducing our next speaker, Ayize Jama-Everett. He holds 3 master's degrees, divinity, psychology, and fine arts writing. Ayize Jama-Everett blends these degrees in all of his work, often identifying as a guerrilla theologian, a community-based therapist, and an Afrofuturist in the same breath. He has taught at Starr King School for the Ministry, California College of the Arts, the University of California, Riverside, Western Colorado College, and several private high schools over 20 years. In addition to all of that, he's also published 4 novels, the Liminal series, and 2 graphic novels, Box of Bones and The Last Count of Monte Cristo. The floor is yours, Ayize.
Thank you so much, Jeffrey, and thank you all for being here. I feel absolutely humbled and a little bit overwhelmed by the grace and the skill of my fellow panelists. I need to start out on this panel about Islam and psychedelics by saying that I am not Muslim. I will say that my familiarity with Islam comes from my father taking Shahada, from teaching at a seminary, and as a result, studying about Islam and consciousness altering plants, and also learning from my Muslim students, and also from living in Morocco for about 2.5 years, which I'll get into a little bit later. And finally, I can't do anything academically or about Islam without mentioning my mentor that is past, Dr. Ibrahim Farajajeh Jones, who is part of the Mevlevi order of Sufis in the US. Without any of these experiences, I wouldn't feel comfortable even showing up on here. And if you hear some trepidation in my voice, just know that's where it comes from. What I'd like to do is delve into the intricate interplay between African Americans, Islam, and psychoactive substances, focusing on cannabis, specifically in psychedelics. My central question is, can historical Islamic perspectives on cannabis inform contemporary discussions about psychedelic use within an African American Muslim communities? I generally come from a harm reduction framework in that we aim to evaluate substance use based on intent, purpose, and context, rather than solely on notions of prohibition and permissibility. And in doing so, I think that may be one of the few places where I might be able to add to this conversation about psychedelics in Islam. Historically, as others will probably be more prepared to share with you, cannabis has occupied a nuanced role within Islamic culture. Introduced to Islamic regions primarily from Persia and India, it entered medical and philosophical discourses through Greek translations of figures like Dioscorides and Galen. In the 10th century, scholars such as Ibn Washiyah and Al-Rasis contributed significantly on the discourse on cannabis. Ibn Washiyah, for instance, in his seminal work on poisons, explicitly warned about the potential dangers of hashish, especially when combined with other substances, as such mixtures could lead to adverse or even lethal outcomes. I find this curious because, as we know now, cannabis in very large doses don't equal lethal outcomes. So what were the other mixtures that were going on? Conversely, Al-Rasi documented medical applications of cannabis while simultaneously advocating for cautious moderation, highlighting an awareness that while cannabis could offer therapeutic benefits, its misuse posed substantial risk. And we're kind of in the same place now, right, where psychedelics are coming into the public conversation and perhaps into the Muslim conversation from a medical model. And the question is, do the spiritual benefits or the physical benefits outweigh some of the detractions possibly with other psychedelics? The role of cannabis within Islamic practice becomes even more intriguing when we examine its use among Sufi mystics. In the 13th century, Sufis, particularly within the Hadir community in Afghanistan, employed cannabis not as a recreational intoxicant, but as a deliberate aid in spiritual development. And for those of you that are unaware, when we use psychedelics as a deliberate aid in spiritual development, the term that we generally tend to use is entheogen, which connects one to the God within. Hadir, regarded as a Sufi saint, portrayed cannabis as a divine blessing intended to enhance spiritual clarity and foster closeness to God. He taught his disciples that cannabis could, quote, dissipate the shadow clouding their souls and brighten their spirit, unquote. Such historical accounts underscore how, when used thoughtfully within specific spiritual frameworks, cannabis was viewed as a valuable tool rather than being categorically condemned. I think it's important to recognize that cannabis, especially in large doses, exhibits psychedelic properties, often inducing hallucinations or deeply altered states of consciousness. While lower doses typically result in relaxation and mild euphoria, higher doses can profoundly alter perception, a reality acknowledged both historically and in contemporary cultures. Now, the permissibility of psychedelic substances within Islamic jurisprudence is a subject that's of ongoing debate among scholars today, okay? In 2024, the Ayatollah Rouhani, a prominent Shia authority, issued a fatwa stating that the use of entheogens and psychoactive substances was halal for Shia Muslims, provided their consumption occurs under the supervision of qualified experts and does not impair the mind. This perspective obviously contrasts with more conservative interpretations that classify all intoxicants as haram, highlighting the complexity and diversity of thought within Islamic discourse and psychedelics. A personal example of this complexity that I have is from the Gnawa of Morocco. They provide an excellent example of the syncretic use of psychoactive substances within an Islamic context. These are descendants of West African slaves transported during the trans-Saharan slave trade. The Gnawa preserved many cultural and spiritual traditions despite the constraints of slavery. Notably, their religious practice often incorporates cannabis to manage interactions with jinn, supernatural beings significant in Islamic cosmology. In Gnawa ceremonies, cannabis is employed to facilitate altered states of consciousness deemed necessary for perceiving, understanding, and controlling these jinn. Such practices vividly illustrate how psychoactive effects of cannabis can be integrated thoughtfully and purposely into a religious context, serving spiritual, social, and therapeutic functions. The Gnawa are interesting to me because I see them as a sort of example of what would have happened if African Americans during the transatlantic slave trade were able to maintain some of the cultures that they had in Africa. The culture of the Sahel for the Gnawa, as I've experienced it, is still very much intact, and it's still very much a Muslim community, you know. And at the same time, there's this incorporation of these other compounds, which technically are not prohibited within the words of the Quran. So this complexity resonates within African American Muslims communities today. The history of African American Muslims in the United States is both rich and complex, tracing back to the earliest days of slavery. It's estimated that approximately 30% of Africans brought to America as slaves were Muslim. Despite the oppressive conditions of slavery, individuals like Bilal Muhammad and Omar ibn Said maintained their Islamic faith and practices behind manuscripts and narratives that attest to their enduring spirituality. In the 20th century, various waves of Sufi orders have profoundly influenced African-American Muslims' identities, including the Shahadi order, emphasizing a balance between strict adherence to Islamic law and deep mysticism, the Chishti order, known for its devotional practices and community service, the Murid Sufi Brotherhood, recognized for its robust engagement with social justice, and the Chachani and Burhani orders, originating from Senegal and Sudan, respectively, noted for their advocacy of oppressed populations. These orders resonate strongly among African-American Muslims because they encapsulate a dual commitment to spiritual depth and social justice, directly addressing the systematic inequalities and historical traumas experienced by African Americans. Now, this is where my sci-fi imagination comes through. I imagine if the Muridi order, originating from Senegal and the Gambia, brought to U.S. Muslims not only the word of Islam, but also traditional healing methods that included conscious altering plants, it would be hard for those who have a favorable view of Islam and Africa to not adopt its healing methods over the West, which is so often ignores the mental, physical, and emotional health of Black people. I mean, consider the scenario of an African-American Muslim who, in seeking spiritual enlightenment, partakes in a psychedelic experience and encounters what they perceive as a profound connection with the divine. Without access to an imam or a religious leader familiar with such experiences, they may struggle to contextualize and integrate this event within their Islamic faith. The situation underscores the need for greater familiarity and understanding of psychedelics among Muslim scholars and leaders. Even without fully endorsing their use, fostering informed dialogue, which is a hallmark of harm reduction, can provide necessary support to individuals navigating these complex spiritual landscapes. Sufism's appeal to African Americans lies in its emphasis on personal spiritual experience and direct connection to the divine, offering an alternative to mainstream religious practices that may not address our unique historical and cultural context. This mystical branch of Islam focuses on the inward search for God and the cultivation of the soul, resonating with those seeking deeper meaning beyond ritualistic observance. Historically, Sufism's syncretic and adaptable nature has allowed it to integrate aspects of various cultures around the world, making it particularly relevant to African Americans exploring spirituality outside of traditional frameworks. The experiential nature of Sufism aligns seamlessly also with the use of entheogens, again, substances that induce spiritual experience, potentially facilitating profound mystical states. The practices such as chanting, music, and dance are designed to transcend the ego and experience unity with the divine. Entheogens have been used in various spiritual traditions to achieve similar states of consciousness, suggesting a potential compatibility with Sufi practices. For African Americans, combining Sufism with entheogenic experiences could offer a path to healing from collective trauma and reconnecting with ancestral roots, providing a holistic approach to spiritual well-being. The anti-hegemonic appeal of non-Christian mysticism lies in its capacity to offer African Americans a spiritual framework untainted by histories of oppression. Islam, with its rich mystical traditions, provides an avenue for exploring spirituality outside the context of Western dominance. Similarly, psychedelics have been recognized for their potential to induce profound mystical experiences that transcend conventional perceptions of reality. So for African American Muslims, the exploration of psychedelics may parallel their embrace of Islamic mysticism, a pursuit of direct personal encounters with the divine that challenge established structures and offers pathways to liberation and self-realization. In conclusion, by examining Islam's rich historical engagement with cannabis, we can thoughtfully approach contemporary discussions about psychedelics within African-American Muslim communities. I'll say in Muslim communities writ large. Emphasizing harm reduction and contextualizing substance use within spiritual, therapeutic, and social frameworks aligns closely with core Islamic values of health, justice, and spiritual growth. Ultimately, our focus must shift from the substances themselves to the intention, context, and outcomes associated with their use. And thank you very much for your time.
Thanks so much, Ayize. Now we have Dr. Kamal Abu-Shamsieh, who's a scholar and expert in spiritual care. He serves as an assistant professor of practical theology and directs the Interreligious Chaplaincy Program at the Graduate Theological Union, or GTU, and teaches courses in spiritual care, including one on psychedelic chaplaincy. He earned his PhD in practical theology from the Graduate Theological Union and focused on the intersection of ethics and law in Prophet Muhammad's dying as a model for end-of-life care. Dr. Abu-Shamsieh, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Blessed Ramadan. Ramadan Mubarak to all of you. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. And the angel says, glory be unto you, God. We have no knowledge except what you have taught us. Don't want to repeat what my colleague Sugra and Ayize mentioned. I bring a different experience in it. First, as a Muslim chaplain who worked for many years in healthcare and create spaces for people to articulate their concerns, share their struggles, spiritual pain, and also work with them on theological reflections, offering compassionate care and support. With this, I would like to also thank the Center for the Study of World Religion at Harvard Divinity School. some of the notes that I would like to share with you, and I'm eager to have the questions and answers and engage with the scholars and speakers on their perspectives on psychedelics and Islam. Some of the notes I would like to share with you is, number one, most Muslims lack the knowledge about psychedelics. What is it? What does it do? Where it's derived from? Where it's used? The intention behind it. The second, most people who opt for psychedelic treatment, the majority are not using that for recreational uses. People suffering from mental illness, trauma, unhealed trauma, PTSD, suicide ideation, without labeling, it is out of needs and necessity. And when they go to our Islamic centers across the US, most Muslim leaders, especially imams, lack the training and the knowledge of how to deal with people of specific needs. With those three things in mind, the focus here today is on the need for healing within the Muslim community. The one thing in question that we would like to start to discuss is the means to healing. Are the means, which is psychedelics, appropriate, recommended, detested, all of the core of action that our Islamic norms provide for us. At the same time, let's keep the setting together. It is an interdisciplinary team that deals with the issue of psychedelics, from chaplains or guides, counselors, and physicians. And in the context of the US, it is done in a medical facility. So when we come to look at the psychedelics, we look at our lives as individuals, how we practice, the rituals, the language that we use. We live at a time of keeping the mystery of life, that the divine wisdom is unknown to us, and living in a life of paradox while trying to nourish our souls as well as keeping our intellect. With that, how do we support this particular community as they try to live faithfully without stigma? They have been surrounded by stigma in this secular society, keeping in mind that God has already bestowed his honor and dignity on everyone, Muslim and non-Muslim alike. And for us, and myself, who, as a disclaimer, I have not used any entheogens, any psychedelic experiences, and my knowledge has been informed by the people that I create spaces for them to hear their narratives. At the core of the issue, can we have the courage to discover the presence of God in surprising places and in unexpected ways, to think through my or our Islamic theology while we live it? And that requires a lot of internal reflections on the tradition, reflection on the sources, reflection on the context, without being self-serving. And that is a red line that Muslims are keen to keep. We're not bending Islam for the temporary pleasure of anyone. We're trying to struggle jointly within the faith, how we maintain a faithful life that is faithful to the tradition, at the same time looking at the people that we deal with. And when here, where is the starting point when discussing psychedelics? We have not yet to agree on the starting point. Can we look at the Quran for the starting point? And everyone knows that there is no direct text. Like in many other cases, the Quran does not address the text or the issues in details. Can we look at the tradition of the Prophet? Can we look at the scholarly opinion? And in particular, the most close to it, not yet the same, is the prohibition on alcohol. Can we look at the lived experiences of people? Sugra mentioned her own particular unique story, but that is one story of many others outside who have not yet to share their stories. Those personal narratives, can we listen to their trauma? Can we consider the context of time and space, which is now we're talking about Muslims living as a minority, being attacked, stigmatized, and endure hardship, internal and external, in the context of living in the United States. Also, can we take the tradition with its interpretation sacred, knowing that there is room for reinterpretation of the tradition? The way a question is asked will lead to a different answer. All of that on the expense of people's own experiences. That, I think, is a question is important to look at. The prohibition of alcohol might not be the appropriate starting point to address psychedelics, because the side effects and the premise of the legal foundation for the prohibition of alcohol is not wide enough. The preservation of the mind is a great foundation of Islam. We need to widen it here to include the preservation of faith, the preservation of life. Many of the people I meet with, and had the pleasure of breaking the fast last night with a group of Muslims, and the majority of them are unmasked. They have been isolated, driven out, or they find no spiritual nourishments in the style of the way Islam is being presented. They've been leaving out of the Muslim community and creating a community of their own, reaching out to people from within other communities of faith and racial diversity. Many of them are vulnerable and marginalized. What they need is compassion, not judgment. They are yearning for a relationship with God, even if that relationship they search is unconventional. Still, they are attached to what God called, attach yourself to the rope of God and do not lose hope. My role is to affirm their dignity, affirm their pain, support them, and at the same time, explore the normative sources to uphold the law while I'm relieving their spiritual pain and emotional pain and listen to their narratives. I don't want to repeat what the previous speakers. I would like to end, even though the time is still, we have the time to look at models. How can we start to explore the issue of psychedelics within the Muslim community? The traditional way of applied theology does not work. In this case, the text informs how we practice. We need to widen it to include fiqh al-waqi', jurisprudence of the moment, of what the issue we deal with. So we look at contextualized theology with a new relationship with the lived experiences. The lived experiences need to be listened to and given concrete weight as they are exploring and defining the time and space, the location of Muslims. The second part is listening is an essential component of this process. If we are to reach not a consensus, but an understanding of where people coming from, we need to listen to their unique stories. Avoid disregarding their pain and their own uniqueness. And in this case, all parts of Sharia are important. When we deal with community that experiences pain, thinking about suicide, preservation of religion and life supersedes and is more important than looking at the issue from a pure preservation of the mind. No field is more or less important than the other. We need to look at it from an interdisciplinary approach. So this process of looking at it, we start to look how we practice our life as Muslims without any community in mind, alone most of the time. Sometimes our families or the families of the people, and not just in psychedelics, in many other causes, are out of shame, disavowing their children, cutting them off from the source of spiritual support. Once again, my role here and the goal of my participation is not to twist and to subject Islam to the narrow individual needs of people. It is a way to journey and to witness the pain of my fellow Muslims and others who seek to understand and to bring a relationship with God that has been disconnected through different means. With this, I end, and I'm looking forward to more discussion deep on this topic. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Kamal. All right, with that, I have the pleasure of introducing Taran Savea, who is a scholar of Islam and Muslim societies across the Indian Ocean world. He received his PhD in history from the University of California, Los Angeles, and he is the Prince Al-Waid bin Talal Associate Professor of Islamic Studies at Harvard Divinity School. Taran, the floor is yours.
Oh, thank you, Jeff, and salam, everyone. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon from where I'm logging in from Cambridge. And I want to just say that I feel very, very humbled to be here. I mean, firstly, to be surrounded by my my co-panelists who are experts on the subject and really have been speaking and presenting their very edifying views, and honored just to be invited by Jeff to be part of this gathering. The comments I have will largely be, on one hand, kind of responding or summarizing the main points of the papers, and through that drawing out some perhaps discussion points, questions, I hope. And they'll be please forgive me for the facile nature of these comments. But I think it's been a treat to listen to these presentations for me and for everyone here, to learn about, for that matter, these three wonderful speakers and presenters in terms of their understandings of Islam and psychedelics, a subject, as all of them reminded us, has not drawn sufficient attention. Now, Sugra's, I mean, I should mention my presenters are very kind and humble enough to allow me to call them by their first names. We began with Sugra's paper, and Sugra was really introducing us, to giving us a personal narrative, as Kamal pointed out in the last presentation, that this is one of the many personal narratives that we can recover in terms of this story of Islam and psychedelics. And this really, we were treated to this personal narrative where, for the matter, kind of what we learned of psychedelics here, and was not in a sense of veiling, or in a sense of veiling a sense of consciousness, but an unveiling of a sense of consciousness, an unveiling of the mind. No, but what really struck me about this discussion today, and I really think this should be something that I hope we can take up more in the Q&A and in any follow-ups to a session like that, is how, for that matter, there's so much invested today in the discussion of of psychedelic research and beyond that, clinical psychedelic research itself, how Sugra's presentation really reminded us about questions of inclusivity that still at times need to be addressed, be it about the music in these spaces, be it the role of Muslim women in these spaces. But what was also quite striking about this was how, for the matter, in this personal narrative, we were treated to an attempt by Sugra itself to kind of carve a space for Islam, be it in terms of the transcription of expressions or be it moving from there into this building of a plant medicine community, Rouhani, which we learned so much about. And one of the things that was really kind of kept, there was this constant reminder about how, for that matter, there was this consciousness of being Muslim, consciousness of the Quran, following the way of the Sunnah, throughout this story and this narrative of that we were treated to. No, we moved from Sugra's paper. We were, it was wonderful. I must thank the organizers for putting these papers together in such a wonderful way. From Sugra's paper, we were treated to Ayize's paper, taking us into a history of cannabis and really the complexity of the complexity of the past, in which, we were reminded of the fact of really appreciating context instead of being preoccupied with a certain notion of what the substance is. Now, really, for that matter, these were raising more questions about how do we engage like a history of altered states of consciousness through psychedelics and through, for that matter, cannabis here. Now, what is it when communities spoke about direct experiences of the divine? I mean, this is for scholars who work on or researchers who study the history of Islam. I mean, and other religions. It's not unsurprising to kind of learn of communities in the past and even in the present of how, for that matter, the use of psychoactive substances, for the matter, including cannabis, has involved the mediation of other realms, right? Other alams, or for that matter, the mediation of spirits. In this case, there was a mention of jinn. Now, beyond that, one of the things that was quite striking here was that beyond the direct encounters with the divine, one of the emphasis on context was really in terms of reminding us about how mystical experiences involving psychoactive substances or psychedelics can also be geared towards overcoming a collective trauma. And this was something that really I think it was again following up from Sugra's reminders of what needs to be central or more central in our conversations of psychedelics and clinical psychedelic. Another reminder we were given of what is often left out of these conversations. Beyond that, and this is where I think there was a wonderful transition from Ayize's paper to Kamal's paper, where Ayize reminded us about traditional healing methods and the use of plants, herbaria, psychedelics. And one of the things that and I mean, this from my, one of the things that those of us who work on Islamic healers and healing techniques and or spiritual healing techniques beyond is within Islamic societies and beyond, it's often, I mean, it's a reminder when you work with communities working with plant medicines or working even with psychoactive substances at times, that one of the things that's very central within this world of traditional healing is how at times what we often defined today as biomedicine and this world of deductions being based on visible symptoms is often unconvincing for communities that actually have generations of passed down knowledge that involve the mediation of other realms, at times the unseen realms. No, but one of the things that was really in this conversation, be it about collective traumas or be it about healing, was this reminder that perhaps at times the conversations about psychedelics have often centered about recreational users of psychedelics. And Kamal's paper and presentation was really reminding us about the role of healing within communities, the role of individual traumas, and on that traumas of individuals getting together as communities or so. Now, this was really an appeal for us to kind of appreciate the fact of of appreciating and upholding the dignity of individuals. Now, there was so much in this wonderful presentation in terms of reminding us, like I think, and this is something that came through both Sugra's papers and Ayize's papers. Kamal was reminding us about the fact of really recognizing the presence of God, the immanence of God in surprising places that we're often not looking at. And one of the things here was that in Kamal, in all his work and chaplaincy, he was really speaking about the fact that that there are debates, they're being confused here for the matter. There's been obsession with talking about the substances themselves. Like Ayize says, there's been comparisons made between other debates on the permissibility of intoxicants at the expense, often at personal narratives, appreciating or centering the lived experiences of individuals. Now, for the matter, Kamal really put it very clearly that the task at hand for the is to center the experiences, the personal narratives, and listen to them, learn from them. And there was a real reminder here of how, for that matter, what should be central here is a kind of jurisprudence of the moment, if I quote him. And this really was I mean, I just want to end with some points because I want to open it up for questions. Is this really kind of struck me? There were two things that came out. I mean, for that matter, one of the things that was very much this reminder of really expanding the conversation of psychedelics, making it much more inclusive of communities that are often left out of those conversations. Beyond that, really thinking about the fact of whether there's a kind of recreational element or recreational definition that has perhaps unintentionally seeped into this idea of psychedelics. Now, also really opening up with this conversation and this really takes off from all three papers here, is on one hand, this idea, the papers were really reminding us about how, for that matter, the conversation on Islam and psychedelics has often not been centered to conversations on psychedelics, and almost, and if I may say, almost surprised at that, and completely. And this is something that is often striking scholars of Islam and Islamic societies, is and this is, that more recently there's been a lot of conversation about how, for that matter, Islamic history often involved be it ambiguities, debates. And one of the things that was central in the role in terms of histories of psychedelics also were debates over the permissibility, debates over the benefits, harms, now, context over substances. I mean, and this really draws on both the points that the papers raised. Now, the role of substances in healing and pain. Now, it's really perhaps these were the debates over the use and even recognition of moments at which the debates over not how at times non-use was whether these substances were prescribed or proscribed, declared permissible or impermissible. These were important debates, and also throughout that some of the presentations have been alluding to. And I think coming as a scholar of Islam, it's such a treat to listen to this. And I mean, I hope that some of these comments have done some justice to the papers that were presented today.
Thank you so much, Taryn. Absolutely.
Taryn, do you have a final reflection for us here?
Do we have time?
Of course.
Okay, so
Of
no,
course.
just following up, I mean, on all these wonderful points they raised, and it's really like, I think one thing that really keep coming up is this kind of idea, like kind of let Muslims speak for themselves, or non-Muslims speak for themselves. It's kind of really like, I mean, ethics is kind of, if we speak of a kind of ethics-based morality, it's kind of they're defining ethical behavior every day, be it in healing, be it in connections with God. And one of the things that even in the debate of permissibility, quite even in the conversations that Muslims have, whether it's allowed, whether God forgives, whether it's actually haram, whether it's makruh, whether it's and these are very sophisticated conversations that go on. The individuals are engaging and debating permissibility on an everyday basis. So it's not like coming down, and maybe that's where the debate needs to begin on the ground, and that's what's wonderful. And talking about the Orientalism, the colonial context, there's been a bit of work in terms of like how in colonial India, going back to Sugra's point, how, for the matter, kind of a kind of criminalization of substances for that matter, be it opium or be it other forms of cannabis in consumption, really had contributed to, for that matter, the stripping away of spirituality, traditional healing practices, etc. And there's been work on that, and often you wonder when in a kind of post-World War II context where most Muslims are living in societies that were central to the war of drugs, and how criminalization of drugs, for that matter, and substances, or criminalization of any conversation on psychedelics in many societies of the globe might also contribute to a kind of really taking away and prevention of those conversations of that. And if I'm getting okay, sorry, I know I'm off time, so I will watch. Thank
No
you.
problem at all. Thank you so much for that the succinct remarks. And thank you to all of our panelists and our respondent today for sharing your work with us. And thanks to everyone in the audience for your wonderful questions. We're grateful to the center's director, Dr. Charles Stang, Lori Sedgwick, our events coordinator, and to the rest of the CSWR staff for their support for this event today. We're also grateful for the support of the broader Harvard study of psychedelics in society and culture that Jeffrey mentioned earlier. As mentioned at the start, we have many more psychedelics-related events this semester. We'll be doing our walking tour of Harvard psychedelic history tomorrow, and then April 9th and May 7th, all starting at 5 in front of the CSWR. You can sign up for those on our website. And then the other event that Jeff mentioned at the top, psychedelic facilitation programs, taking stock of an evolving landscape with an eye towards spiritual care, will be on the 22nd of April. Sharing findings from a collaboration between Dr. Politsky and Dr. Peacock in the CSWR on how psychedelic facilitation programs in the US are addressing spirituality and spiritual care. And with that, we'll bid you all adieu for the evening or the morning or the afternoon, wherever you are. Thank you for your attention, for your thoughtful questions, and we wish you a lovely rest of the day.
cswr.hds.harvard.edu, copyright 2025, the President and Fellows of Harvard College.